need to bring Ron Swanson back up here.
When you deserve Ron Swanson.
Wow.
Ron Swanson will present himself.
I feel like we're missing people. Did you remove more?
Welcome back to Sermon Rewind. With you, as always, is myself, but on the opposite side of the table. However, on the other side in the hot seat this week is none other than he who is full of sass and vinegar, Todd Pfeiffer. How's it going, Todd?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, you're
full
doing
of
all right?
sass and vinegar, apparently.
It's the best way for me to describe who and how you are.
You know, some people take like apple cider vinegar for a health supplement. I don't, but other people do.
Those people are disgusting.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. And you're worried about sort of lambasting your congregation?
Well, you didn't name names.
There's probably a bunch of listeners that's what they do.
But here's the deal. Because I don't know, ignorance is bliss, right?
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, fantastic. We are in the second to last week of the Therefore series, which takes a detailed deep dive into the resurrection stories, or the evidences of Jesus' resurrection when he shows up on the scene. And you took the sermon this last week, particularly around a unique and interesting story, one that I think a lot of people know.
Yep.
So wasting no time, you kick things off with this fishing story of all stories, right? The disciples go out on a fishing trip after they have already seen Jesus risen from the grave, and they kind of know their marching orders by and large. They decide to go out and do what they have always done. What is it about that exactly? You have any thoughts on that? I'm curious.
So the challenge here is that it's not like it's something new for them.
Mm-hmm.
They were fishermen before.
Yeah.
Right. They in some ways get plucked out of, I don't want to say obscurity, but they were not on a track to be disciples of a rabbi. Right?
You mean from the beginning?
From the beginning.
Fair enough.
Right.
Yeah.
The fact that they were sort of pulled from their various places, that's sort of I don't want to say the appeal or the allure of the story, but Jesus says, hey, I'm going to take a bunch of people from some random places and we're going to pull them together and we're going to create a band and we're going to go do a thing, right?
Okay.
So the fact that they go fishing after this is, it's a little bit of a return to where they were. I mean, from a functional standpoint, you could say, well, yeah, what else were they going to do?
Sure.
Right? They may say, well, we don't have a rabbi anymore and we're not doing a ministry and none of us feel like taking this on ourselves.
But it had some pretty good real life practice. I mean, he sent them out with a lot of authority and power plenty of times.
He did. But it's interesting to sort of think about that even from our own lens sometimes of, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of like what happens when your boss leaves, whoever is leading your team, right? Do you always look to somebody else to kind of be in charge?
Okay.
Like Jesus is Jesus,
mm-hmm.
right? There's not a shared governance thing there. I mean, he's not a dictator. It's not a totalitarian thing, but it's pretty clear that he is the teacher.
Yeah.
Right? They're supposed to be the disciples of the teacher.
Fair enough.
And I suppose too, I mean, and again, we always have to be careful about giving them a benefit of the doubt versus critiquing them in that culture. Do you just sort of say, okay, I'm going to be in charge now. I'm going to take this mantle and go, right?
Yeah.
But I think we also, again, have to sort of look at this again symbolically and say, maybe this is them running. Maybe this is them saying, okay, yes, they were equipped in some level. They tried some things. They did get sent out. And after this, they're like, I don't know. That didn't seem like it worked out.
Okay.
I think I'm done.
So fair enough. You sort of proposed, we'll say, that this big idea, the theme of the text itself had to do with them doubting, something we saw last week, and a continuation of that, but also something about service. Now, if you could unpack that for us for a little bit, because that's kind of a big leap. At least right off the page, you wouldn't necessarily come to that conclusion on your own. So how'd you conclude that?
Yeah, I think in general, when we think about our Christian life, and we can apply this to a lot of different things, in work and our family and that sort of thing. When we have obstacles, when we have hurdles, when we have things that don't work out,
mm-hmm.
we start to wonder, is this really what I should be doing? Right?
Yeah.
And, we can talk about words like resiliency and grit and all this kind of thing to say that, can-do attitude. But at some point, we have all stopped doing things because it just doesn't seem like it's working.
Yeah.
And in some cases, we actually applaud that as wisdom. Oh, I'm not doing this anymore. And people will even say, oh, yeah, I think that's the right decision. It doesn't seem like that was really going to be a good long-term solution for you. And so when we think about our faith, when we, again, go through different trials, whether they are earthly, whether they're more spiritual, whether we question our own understanding of God, whether we question forgiveness, whether we question grace, when we see sadness around us, it can be easy for us to sort of say, I don't know if this is where I'm really supposed to be. And again, we're human, we're weak, we have insecurities.
Yeah.
And so the moment that we sort of have an awkward moment, we sort of say, oh, you know what? Just kidding. I'm going to go. And off the door. Out the door we go. So for us, it's a question of saying, God will provide. Jesus will equip. Keep serving. Keep going after it. All these things that are all these spiritual themes in Scripture, keep doing it. Easier said than done sometimes for the average person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's the message. The message is you're going to have doubts. If you expect this to just be, okay, you give your life to Jesus and then everything is easy from that point onward, it's not the case.
Okay. So I love that. That makes a good segue really to the 4 points of the sermon, which essentially, you correct me if I'm wrong, but if that is kind of the big idea that there is this significant problem with doubt and we're all going to have it, and yet we're still called to sort of continue chasing after him and serving the world in which he's called, the big question is always, well, how do we do that?
Right.
Like what's required of us as a result? So jumping right into your first point, you said doubting servants must accept their insufficiency.
Right.
Which is an interesting word, right? When you look back at that story, you have professional fishermen, or at least the bulk majority of them are. They know what they're doing. They know how to do this. They've been doing it for a long, long time. So they go right back to it. Only the downside is they're failing miserably, right? Which maybe is a common thing for fishermen in general. But the story doesn't come to us by accident.
Right.
They go out and all night long, they fail miserably. They're not striking it. They're not, bringing any fish home. They're not even able to do what they used to do well.
Right.
What's our takeaway from that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting, we can sort of dissect that story a lot of different ways. There's part of me when I read that, I want to know what the disciples are thinking. Mm-hmm. I want to know what they're discussing. Are they discussing things in the boat? Sure. Are they sort of unpacking what's been going on? How are you feeling about it? That sort of thing. Yeah, you could look at it just a tangible standpoint, because let's say they do go fishing and they get a bunch of fish and then they can sell those fish, and then they go out the next night and they get a bunch more fish, and then they just kind of get back into a routine of fishing. Okay, well, I'm going to go back to my prior job. This is my life now. Ups and downs, that sort of thing. It's a bigger question then of saying, well, were they wondering not about the fishing themselves, but why they were doing it at all? Because we can spend energy doing stuff that we're even maybe good at. That's where you go say that. I said that in a sermon, that do they have to catch nothing?
Right.
If anything, if they had caught something, that might have been a bad thing for them from a distraction standpoint.
Sure. Were
they out there on the water going, I don't feel like I'm in the right spot right now? Of course, it's a practical decision. It is a practical thing for them to do. They should go fishing, right?
Yeah.
Because their teacher's gone.
Depends on who you ask, right?
Of course. But there would be lots of people that would say, yeah, you kind of did that weird religious crusade thing with that strange fella for a while, and yeah, he's gone now. So time to go get a real job.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's a question of saying, do I even really have a good sense of why I do anything? Right. Because that insufficiency thing it's very contradictory to what we're used to being taught. Be confident in yourself, believe in yourself, work hard, look out for number one, don't depend on anybody else. So to say that I'm insufficient, it just sounds like negative talk. There's even, there's workshops, there's books that will say, don't sit there and critique yourself, bring yourself down. Think happy thoughts about your ability and your gifts and your contribution. This is I hate to go SNL, but the Stuart Smalley, I remember the skit from back in the day. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
So that, for us to just say, I'm insufficient, it's weird to a lot of people.
Yeah. So, but here's the dilemma, though, is that, and you said something, I'm trying to not put words in your mouth, but more or less.
That's all right, you can. Go ahead.
You said that why not? Why not go back to fishing, right?
Yeah.
They knew how to do this. Their master had gone on. What was their other option? The downside to this is twofold, though, is that leading up to the death and resurrection of Jesus, he was not short on words when it came to explaining to them what their lives would look like afterward. It's not like this came with a giant question mark attached to it, right? Even more than that, and there was a whole lot of moments where they got to see firsthand where Jesus was not very kind-hearted and warm to those who seemed to mix normal life in the kingdom too much, meaning, hey, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go, but let me go home and take care of my father and my family first, right? He was not keen on that. And so the disciples, I think, were well aware that their lives couldn't just be as simple as going back to fishing, especially when given the amazing, I would almost argue responsibility of beholding him resurrected and knowing that now, as I have said in previous sermons, your life, your talents, your gifts, etc., are now required of you very differently. If that's true, and this is kind of where the linchpin is, right? That the disciples are struggling up against with this sort of disobedience and doubt that's kind of pushed them in this way to go back to normal life. I'm curious from you, because you have a tendency to have that moment where you say, hey, here's a chance for you to throw Bethany under the bus.
Right.
I don't want to do that because I think that's terrible. However, I will say this. If it is true that those who are called, that those who are given eyes to see, ears to hear, a heart to be able to accept that Christ has died and Christ has risen again, would you say even now, today, that our lives, our time, our energy, our gifts, our talents are required of us differently? Or can we just go on fishing and doing whatever as if life will just roll on without him?
Yeah, the answer is yes and yes, because it is required of us differently. The question is, are we going to try to fit that into the same sort of structure as everybody else, right? And when we've talked about this before, if you say, okay, I am a child of God, I am a sinner saved by grace, I'm called to share the gospel with anyone that I encounter, right? I still get up every day, and I mentioned this in the sermon. I get up, I shower, I get dressed, I go to my job. I happen to have a couple of really cool jobs where I can be very impactful and work for organizations that I very much believe in, that I think have a real, global impact.
Yeah.
Lots of other people go to jobs where, they're producing products and services that don't have a particularly spiritual or evangelistic feel to them. They're just contributing to a market economy. They're just kind of doing their thing.
Like fishing,
yeah. Right? People want fish,
yeah.
Right? So you go get it, right? So you can just kind of do that, and again, sort of do the minimum part of, okay, sure, yeah, I'm a Christian and I go to church and I tithe, and well, if something comes up or somebody asks me about whatever, sure, I'll share the gospel, right? Mm-hmm. Versus a mindset of, I'm going to look for this, like literally every opportunity I have to share the gospel boldly, dare I say aggressively, enthusiastically.
Okay.
As opposed to, I'm going to let it come to me. And I think that's kind of the difference, because yeah, maybe there's a percentage of people that God calls to say, hey, you've got all these things, you're doing this stuff, and you get a nice job and a home and whatever. Stop. Sell your house, blah, blah, go way over there, go do this crazy thing, right? That is way beyond your sort of comprehension of what you thought your life was going to be like. There's that percentage. That's not everybody.
Yeah.
Lots of people, get up and shower and go to work, but that's your mission field, okay? Your mission field is your office. Your coworkers that's the people that you're sharing the gospel with.
Yeah.
And that's frightening to people.
Right.
I mean, I get that. It's intimidating. You walk in every single day and say, how am I going to share Christ's love with them? Not just be a good person, not just coexist, not just have a reputation of being a solid coworker that people can depend on. How am I going to completely change some people's worldview in the office?
Yeah. Which is I will say this, you're right, a huge issue because it leaves, all kinds of mystery to it, right?
Right.
But it leans into your second point really well. You said that in response to accepting our insufficiency, doubting servants must trust Jesus' sufficiency.
Right.
So I want to ask this just simply and broadly, and hopefully we can get through it really quick because we still have some more to go. But what does he mean by that exactly? Like when Todd Pfeiffer says, we need to trust Jesus' sufficiency for such a task as you were just describing.
Right.
No similar than they.
Right.
What do you mean by that exactly?
I think it simply comes down to, again, giving Jesus the power source for what we're doing and the timing and the strategy. Again, it's our role to say, I'm going to do the best I can to train myself, to discipline myself to look for this, right?
Yeah.
It's the difference between, again, hey, Jesus, if you really want me to do something, send a lightning bolt, send a clear, obvious, blinking sign at me, okay? And God does that. But then it's also the still small voice, the whisper, where you say, hey, there's this person, we've had some conversations, I don't know how to get to the next step, right? And sure, I could go read a book and I could ask my pastor and I could say, hey, what's a good conversation segue from, this to this? There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But it still comes down to saying, look, Jesus, you're going to give me, if I'm open and willing to listen and be receptive, you'll give me the opportunity, the words. And so then it's just saying, it's not for us to then sit back and say, okay, I'll just wait. Just let me know.
Yeah. And here's the deal. I totally agree with that. The downside is, and I can speak into this as a pastor because I hear it all the time, folks would sit and listen to that on Sunday and they'll sit and listen to it now and they'll say that's so ambiguous, Todd. Like speaking about letting Jesus be a power source, I'm not stopping him from doing that. I don't know what real applicable boots on the ground, what that looks like. And you used, and I think you used it really well on Sunday, use this term surrender, right? Right. Which is the appropriate response. But I think even it needs a little bit of unpacking because it's sort of draped in religious terminology all by itself.
Sure.
So what do you mean by that? 2023, Southern California, what does surrender look like for followers of Jesus right now?
So I think some of it is like, when I think about surrender, the thing that comes to mind is like my comfort, right? And you've even talked about this before about, I go to the grocery store, right? I pick up my stuff and I go stand in line, right? From a social standpoint, there's a social expectation that we're all just going to stand there and just wait.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be a little chit chat, oh, someone's wearing a Laker hat and I'll comment on the game and we'll...
For shame.
Yeah, I know. Just an example. But it's expected that we're just going to kind of stand there.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's what you do.
That's what you do.
It's a learned quantity.
So, and it's comfortable.
Yeah.
I get on my phone. I just kind of look around. I look at the ground. I don't have to interact with anybody. No one's going to expect me either. Mm-hmm. Right? No one is expecting that. If I say to myself, okay, the person in front of me, the person behind me, is this the time? Is this the moment? And that's where I sort of surrender and say, I don't really feel like trying to segue to a hard spiritual shift your worldview conversation. I'm tired. I've been at work all day. I just want to get my groceries and I just want to go home. I just want to watch Netflix and just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, look, I'm going to surrender my comfort, my rest, my desire to just float through life and enjoy the spoils of a worldly existence.
So you're not saying surrender would be, okay, Lord, I'm your vessel. If you bring a lightning bolt down, then I'll do whatever. You're saying surrender as in, I know I don't want to do this, but I know what I've been called to. Therefore, I'm going to step out and do it anyways.
Yeah. I mean, it can still be a lightning bolt.
Sure. Fair enough.
I mean, surrender can be a lot of different things. I mean, it can be, hey, I've been pushing this and pushing this and pushing this, and it feels good to me. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about, the idea that, people people will say, well, you need to take a stand. And sometimes that's manifested as spiritual stuff. Other times it's like, political things. Christians will be very, very loud about, say, certain political issues. And again, we should speak out on certain things. But what are we really taking a stand on? Are we taking a stand on this one political social issue, but we're not having a conversation with the person in the grocery store line about the wonder and grace of Jesus' love?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we might have to look at our own life and say, okay, I've convinced myself that this is the worthy cause here. Mm-hmm. I'm fighting for something that is good, and worthy and even biblical sometimes. But there may be times when Jesus says, hey, look, I appreciate the thought. That's not really where I want you to focus your energy right now.
Yeah.
I want you to surrender your sense of how the world should be. This is the order that things should be in. This is the structure we should follow every single day. And I have to do this. You have to do this. I think I know how the world should run in a whole bunch of different ways that are not my areas of expertise.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so when I run into something, I go, oh, that's not right. How come that's going on? Well, there may be a reason. And maybe I am called to tangibly try to impact it. Maybe that is my nudge from God. Mm-hmm. Hey, yeah, I want you to get involved in that. But other times it might be, you don't need to fix that right now.
Yeah.
You're not in charge.
Yep.
So I think that's the surrender piece. It's us every single day getting up and saying, I'm not in charge.
Yeah.
And you said the phrase willing vessel.
For sure. So what I would say is probably, and I'll wrap this up quick, but probably my favorite part of the sermon, favorite part of the story is that naturally when you read these kinds of stories in the Bible, your assumption is that you're going to fail if you do this, you're going to be successful if you do this, here is a strong rebuke, go and do likewise, right? But instead, Jesus does something really interesting. And third and fourth point really encapsulate what I think that is instead of rebuking, instead of sending a challenge and a charge per se, Jesus opens up the opportunity for people to come and receive from him and receive something deep, meaningful, intimate, life-giving, almost like a balm to the wounded soul, right? Because how discouraging is it to fail at something that you even thought you could do on your own strength, right? And yet he invites them to come have breakfast and loves on them and encourages them and supports them and lets them know that he's here and with them all the way. I'm curious, and we'll make this kind of as our send-off. What do you hope that both all of your listeners that were there on Sunday as well as whoever's tuning in now would be able to take away from that as kind of a hopeful charge in their faithful life?
I mean, the first piece is probably the most obvious, but the most crucial is that, again, Jesus wants to spend time with us, right? And I had a couple of people actually come up to me afterwards and say they appreciated the reminder that, we like in our prayer life especially, we spend a lot of energy with us talking, right?
Yep.
We have to just go sit sometimes and just say, yeah, I'll bring up requests and I'll bring up some things, but Jesus, just speak to me. And maybe there's going to be a louder word some days than others. Maybe it is just going to be quieting your mind, right? Maybe Jesus is going to send the Spirit and just say, we're just going to sit here for a second, right? Because that's the interesting thing in the scripture where it says, the disciples didn't ask him stuff, right? Again, you wonder, was there small talk? Were they talking about fishing, or were they just kind of sitting there, right?
Yeah.
Was it awkward, or was it sort of like, okay, yeah, doggone it. we should have known. Sure. We should have done this, that sort of thing. I guess the other piece that I hope for our congregation is that, we can create an opportunity for us to sit with each other. And what I mean by that is not just, have meals and, small talk and that sort of thing, but we can mix together really what it was, because, you said it earlier, we don't read in the scripture that there was this big lecture from Jesus, right?
Yeah.
There's probably an understanding of rebuke, but that's more of a realization where they go, okay, Jesus doesn't need to say this to me.
Yeah.
So I get that that's awkward. It's not easy to just say, hey, let's just create a church of both challenge and support. Let's create encouragement and accountability. Everybody's going to nod at that and go, oh yeah, that sounds great. Mm-hmm. That's hard. You're going to have some times when there's verbal rebuke. And then there's other times where people are going to come and sit, and you're just going to sit with them, and you're just going to say, I don't need to rebuke you right now. I need to just sit with you.
Yeah.
And you need to feel that I'm still here sitting with you. Even if you're, whether you can encourage, even if you're disappointed, you can just say, hey, we're going to work through this together. If you have doubts, if you have questions, if you have things that you want to do, we're going to figure it out. We're going to do it together as a community. We're going to do it in front of Jesus' throne.
Awesome.
So
very cool. Hey, thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind. Next week, we'll be back to opposite sides of the table as Todd appropriately leads us both in the intro, questions, and closing. As always, we want you to be a part of it. So please take time, whether it's online or live and in person, to take a few moments and send us questions so that we have a little bit of fodder for discussion, but also so that we can be best utilized to help serve you. That's really why we do this. We do this to try to help put boots on the ground in regards to faithful living and following Jesus. So join us in person, join us online, but join us in this journey together. We hope to see you soon.
Thanks for watching.